This yacht is 18 meters long and offers 256 square meters of living space. In usable deck area, it competes with many 80-foot yachts. In a marina, however, that beam can produce a bill more typical of a much larger yacht. Then there is the owner's suite, an area most sales presentations do not discuss frankly enough. I will show you exactly where the compromise lies. The important point is that this yacht is built in Poland, on the historic site of the former Gdansk Shipyard. In a moment, I will show you exactly what draws buyers to it. At the end, I will compare it with the Eco version, one example of which crossed the Atlantic using electric propulsion, batteries and solar power. My name is Tomek Grzesiński. I have spent 20 years selling yachts. I do not represent this model, and I am not paid by the yard. I assess this model exactly as I would any yacht before a client signs a contract. Today, I am looking at the current generation Sunreef 60 Power, in production since 2020. Let's begin with what the Sunreef 60 Power promises. The first advantage comes from Catamaran geometry. 2 hulls and a beam of 10.7 meters. Together, they create usable space that no monohull of the same length can match. The second advantage is shallow draught. You can enter waters that a comparable monohull cannot reach because it draws considerably more. That is the promise. Now let's inspect the yacht as I would with a client, deck by deck, with the actual layout and specification in front of us. We begin with the broker's checklist. Start with the main deck, because this is the space that sells the yacht. As a power catamaran, it has no mast passing through the saloon. The result is a single open-plan space across the full beam, with panoramic glazing and overhead skylights. The layout is configurable. The galley can sit on the main deck or down in one of the hulls. This is not simply a design choice. It changes how the yacht works in daily use. A lower deck galley makes sense with permanent crew. Food preparation stays out of the guest areas, leaving the entire main deck for the saloon and the dining area sitting a dozen or more. If you intend to run the yacht without crew, I would put the galley on the main deck. Otherwise, every coffee and every plate means a trip down into the hull and back up the stairs. That decision also changes the cabin plan. With the galley on the main deck, you can have 5 cabins below. Put it in the hull, and the total drops to 4. The sliding glass wall opens the saloon directly onto an aft cockpit that spans almost the yacht's full beam. The foredeck shows another catamaran advantage: a solid deck instead of a trampoline, with a recessed lounge, sofas, and sunpads. This is one of the strongest areas of the design. A 60-foot monohull simply cannot offer a comparable foredeck terrace. Above it is a substantial flybridge. The yard can configure it for the individual owner, with a bar, jacuzzi, sunpads, or a second outdoor saloon. For me, however, the most practical feature is the electrically operated door at the forward end of the saloon, giving direct access to the foredeck. Open the forward and aft doors, and air flows naturally through the saloon. At anchor in hot weather, that can materially reduce the need for air conditioning. At the stern is a hydraulic platform rated for 700 kilograms. It carries and launches the tender and water toys, then lowers to form a bathing platform. Now back to the suite I mentioned at the start. This is a compromise common to most catamarans, and you need to understand it before you buy, not afterwards. The accommodation sits inside the hulls. The owner's suite occupies roughly 2/3 of the port hull, with a transverse bed, a walk-through wardrobe, and a large ensuite bathroom with a double shower. The hull is long but relatively narrow. Windows are confined to the outboard side, so the suite does not receive light from both sides. By comparison, on a good 60-foot monohull, the owner's suite normally sits amidships, uses the full beam, and has glazing on both sides. A catamaran cannot create the same sense of width. From experience, I know this takes some adjustment. It feels entirely different from a full beam owner's suite. Some clients like the arrangement, others do not. That is why I always recommend spending at least one night on a catamaran like this before signing. The port hull also contains one guest cabin alongside the owner's suite. The remaining guest cabins are in the starboard hull. That separation provides excellent privacy. The owner's suite and most of the guest accommodation sit in different hulls on opposite sides of the yacht. A 6-cabin layout is also available, with an ensuite bathroom for every cabin and accommodation for 12 guests. On a 60-footer, that is an exceptional number of berths. The trade-off is straightforward. living areas comparable with a much larger yacht, but cabins shaped by the narrow hulls. I ask clients where they expect to spend most of their time on board. The answer usually tells us whether this layout is right for them. Now to the yacht, because the way this yacht is built directly affects both quality and the scope for customization. Sunreef was founded in 2002 by French engineer Francis Lapp on the site of the former Gdansk Shipyard. Some of the world's most recognizable luxury catamarans are now built on a site closely tied to the history of the Solidarity movement. This is far more than the assembly of prefabricated parts. The hulls use infusion-molded sandwich composite, with carbon reinforcement in the highest load areas. The yacht carries design category A for ocean passages. The yacht has its own joinery, upholstery, paint and stainless steel departments, along with some of the largest CNC machines in Europe. The production site covers roughly 85,000 square meters. I also looked closely at the interior finish. The yacht is not simply installing pre-built modules. The joinery is fitted and finished on board to the individual owner's specification. This is a genuine, semi-custom yacht, not a standard model with a short options list. That is why two identical examples are difficult to find. You can also see the demand in the yacht's client list. Sunreef owners include Fernando Alonso, Rafael Nadal, Carlos Alcaraz, and Robert Lewandowski. Engine choice changes the yacht's entire operating profile. There are three distinctly different ways to specify it. With twin 300 horsepower engines, you get a relaxed displacement setup. The claimed range is 2,750 nautical miles at 6.5 knots. With twin 715 horsepower engines, maximum speed is between 19 and 22 knots, with a cruising speed of roughly 14 to 15 knots. The most interesting figure, however, is the fuel burn at 10 knots. With the largest engines, total consumption is about 38 liters per hour. With the optional 10,000-liter fuel capacity, that burn rate gives a calculated range of roughly 3,700 nautical miles. That is a realistic transoceanic range for a power catamaran offering this much living space. For context, the classic trade wind route to the Caribbean via Gibraltar and the Canary Islands to Antigua is about 3,000 nautical miles. That leaves a sensible reserve for making the passage under the yacht's own power. A summer in the Mediterranean, followed by a winter in the Caribbean, therefore becomes realistic, without shipping the yacht across the Atlantic. To be clear, this is not an expedition yacht for every condition. The passage must be planned in the right season and weather window, with the trade winds astern. That is how most leisure yachts cross the Atlantic. The Eco sister model has already shown that this is more than a brochure calculation. I will come back to that at the end. The hull geometry also shapes the motion at sea. The slender bows cut through waves rather than climbing over them, while the wide hull spacing limits roll to the point that gyroscopic stabilizers are not considered necessary. The engine rooms sit deep in the aft sections of both hulls and are well insulated for sound. That keeps noise in the saloon low underway. The trade-off is service access. Major work can require removal of deck panels above the engine rooms. That complicates maintenance and should be factored into the purchase decision. Now for details that rarely appear in sales presentations. The crew cabins are in the forepeaks of the two hulls, with one berth in each. Access is from deck level through a hatch and narrow opening, then down a steep ladder. The quarters are tight, which is a meaningful compromise for permanent crew. The second issue is more serious. Much of the yacht's automation runs through a digital control network. Lighting, pumps, and numerous other systems communicate through shared nodes. A network fault, caused, for example, by a failed termination resistor or a device conflict, can take several subsystems offline at once. At that point, you need a technician with diagnostic software, not simply a mechanic with a basic toolkit. My practical conclusion is simple. A technically capable captain is not a luxury on this yacht. It is part of safe operation, particularly in the Caribbean or far from Sunreef service support. If you intend to handle the yacht yourself, remember that a catamaran and a 60-foot monohull maneuver differently. Two engines, separated by almost 10 meters, combined with substantial windage, require different habits when coming alongside. That does not make the catamaran easier or harder, only different. Before taking command on your own, spend a few days with an experienced catamaran captain and develop the right close quarters handling habits. Now to a cost created directly by the yacht's beam of 10.7 meters. It appears almost every time you book a marina berth. A standard berth for a yacht of around 20 meters is normally designed for a monohull with a beam of 5 to 5.5 meters. The Sunreef will not fit. There are two options. Take two adjacent berths, if the marina permits it, or use a berth intended for a larger, wider yacht at a much higher rate. In high season on the Riviera, berthing a multihull can cost almost as much as two standard berths. This is not a Sunreef penalty. It is simply the consequence of beam, and it applies to every catamaran. In practice, owners can reduce their reliance on marinas. Shallow draft, good self-sufficiency, and effective natural ventilation mean this yacht works best at anchor rather than tied up in port for long periods. Now to cost, briefly, because the yacht itself matters more than the spreadsheet. A new Sunreef 60 Power Classic requires a budget of roughly $4.5 to $5 million. The final figure depends heavily on the engines, equipment, and interior finish. As a first estimate, annual running costs can be budgeted at around 10% of the yacht's value, using the industry rule of thumb. Berthing is likely to be an unusually large part of that figure because of the beam. I exclude fuel from fixed costs because it depends on engine hours. At 10 knots, however, the burn remains reasonable for a yacht offering this much space. $4.5 to $5 million is expensive for 60 feet when measured by length, but it is also worth assessing this yacht as you would property, by cost per square meter. The Sunreef 60 Power offers 256 square meters of living space. For comparison, the Bering 88 from episode 5 is a steel 27-meter expedition yacht. It offers exactly the same area, 256 square meters. The Bering costs about $8.8 million. That works out at roughly $18,000 per square meter on the Sunreef, versus $34,000 on the Bering. These are of course very different yachts. A steel explorer designed for autonomy and tougher conditions, and a composite catamaran designed around space and life at anchor. If usable living area is the priority, the Sunreef offers one of the strongest price-to-space ratios in the premium market. Now resale value. Waiting lists support the prices of nearly new examples from the current generation. When one reaches the brokerage market, asking prices often remain close to the cost of a new build. The previous generation, built until 2019, is narrower and has already absorbed much of its initial depreciation. It can be a less expensive route into the brand. But structurally, it is a different yacht from the current Sunreef 60 Power. The continuing value of the older design is illustrated by a yacht built in 2013, whose owner recently invested more than $2 million in a refit. A refit of that scale only makes financial sense when the underlying platform still carries substantial value. Finally, the promised comparison with the Eco version. Brief, but important. The diesels are replaced by two electric motors supplied by a battery bank with 330 kilowatt-hours of capacity. Photovoltaic cells, less than 1 millimeter thick, are integrated into the hull sides and superstructure. Their combined output can reach 24 kilowatts. The yard has even tested their impact resistance with hammer strikes. These are not roof-mounted panels. They are integrated into the yacht's surfaces. At anchor, the system is claimed to support the full hotel load, including air conditioning, for up to 48 hours without starting a generator. The result is silence and no vibration. One Sunreef 60 Power Eco crossed the Atlantic from Gibraltar to Antigua in 3 weeks, relying primarily on solar generation and battery power. According to the yard, it was the first catamaran of its kind to do so. More importantly, this was not a boat show prototype. The system was proven on a real ocean passage. The trade-off is clear. The Eco costs around 5.8 million euros, tops out at 11 to 12 knots, and needs a technically competent crew. The Classic reaches roughly 20 knots and uses a simpler diesel propulsion system. If silence and long periods at anchor are the priority, the Eco premium may be justified. If you value speed and range without constantly managing energy, I would choose the Classic. Time for the broker's score. Build quality and finish, 9 out of 10. The score reflects extensive in-house production, joinery fitted on board, and carbon reinforcement in the critical load areas. It is the highest score I have awarded in this category so far. Design and practicality, 8 out of 10. Credit for natural ventilation, the foredeck terrace, the choice of galley location, and the option of 6 ensuite cabins. Points come off for the narrow cabin proportions and restricted access to the crew quarters. Seakeeping, 8 out of 10. Design category A, slender bows, good transverse stability, and enough range to plan ocean passages at 10 knots. Cost and complexity, 5 out of 10. The beam raises berthing costs in almost every marina. The digital network calls for technically competent crew, and semi-custom construction raises the purchase price. Resale value, 9 out of 10. Waiting lists help keep nearly new examples close to new build pricing, while pre-owned eco-yachts rarely reach the market. The growing market for power catamarans also supports the resale values of recognizable models with limited supply. Overall score, 9 out of 10, the highest I have awarded so far in this series. Verdict: buy it if you genuinely expect to spend most of your time at anchor. Before you sign, answer 3 questions honestly. Are you comfortable with the owner's suite inside a narrow hull? What will berthing cost at your home marina? And do you have a captain who understands the digital systems? If the answers to all 3 are satisfactory, this is a very strong choice. Buy this yacht for what it really is: a floating home with the living space of a far larger yacht. If your plan centers on life at anchor, that is where the design delivers its full value. Next Tuesday, I will assess another model that is often described as almost perfect. I will apply exactly the same broker's score criteria. If you want a broker on the buyer's side to calculate the real cost implications of beam, berthing, and specification before you sign, that is exactly what I do. The yacht you should compare with the Sunreef is already on screen. Click it and stay with me.